The metal doors of the transport shuttle hissed open, and Dr. Kim Hyun-woo took his first breath of recycled station air. After 3 months of deep space travel, even the artificial atmosphere of Kepler Station felt refreshing. He grabbed his single duffel bag and stepped onto the loading platform, his boots echoing against the polished floor. Kepler Station stretched out before him like a massive metal city floating in the void. Through the observation windows, he could see the distant glow of alien suns painting the darkness in colors that had no names in any human language. This was humanity's boldest leap yet. A medical research station built at the edge of known space, where human doctors worked alongside beings from dozens of different worlds. The corridors hummed with constant activity. Hyun-woo watched in fascination as a tall, blue-skinned Arcturian medic discussed treatment options with a human colleague, their universal translator converting complex medical terms between species. Nearby, a group of insectoid Zephyrians clustered around a holographic display, their compound eyes reflecting the dancing lights of genetic sequences. As the station's newest engineer, Hyun-woo had expected to work on mechanical systems and life support equipment. What he hadn't expected was the tour of the long-term care facility that Dr. Park Soo-jin insisted on giving him during his first day. Most of our patients here have conditions that stump traditional medicine, Dr. Park explained, as they walked through the quiet halls. We get the cases that nobody else can solve. That's when Hyun-woo first saw her. Navira sat in her hover chair near the large observation window, tending to a collection of unusual plants that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. She was Thylorian, tall and graceful, with skin that had a subtle pearl-like quality and hair that moved like it was underwater. But what struck Hyun-woo most was the way she worked. Despite being confined to her chair, her hands moved with precise, practiced motions as she adjusted nutrient feeds and checked growth measurements. Navira has been with us for 3 years now, Dr. Park said softly. Before her accident, she was one of the most respected botanical engineers in Thylorian space. She developed new hybrid crops that could grow in harsh environments. Hyun-woo learned that 12 years ago, Navira had been conducting research in a deep-core mining facility when a tunnel collapse buried her under tons of crystalline rock. The rescue took 14 hours. By the time they pulled her free, her spine had been crushed in multiple places. The Thylorians were masters of biological medicine. They could regrow entire organs, cure diseases that would baffle human doctors, and extend lifespans far beyond what nature intended. Their medical technology was so advanced that other species traveled across the galaxy just for consultations. But Navira's injuries were different. The neural pathways in her spine hadn't just been damaged, they had been completely shattered, leaving microscopic gaps that even Thylorian regenerative medicine couldn't bridge. Their doctors tried everything. Dr. Park continued. Stem cell therapy, neural grafts, even experimental quantum healing techniques. Nothing worked. The damage was too complex, too scattered. As they watched, Navira noticed them observing her. She turned her hover chair around and offered a polite smile, though Hyun-woo could see the weariness behind her luminous eyes. This was someone who had been told impossible too many times to count. That night, as Hyun-woo unpacked his belongings in his small quarters, he couldn't stop thinking about Navira. The Thylorians had approached her condition like master gardeners, trying to regrow a damaged plant. But what if the problem wasn't biological at all? What if it was simply a matter of building a better bridge? While everyone else at Kepler Station had grown used to seeing Navira in her hover chair, Hyun-woo couldn't shake the feeling that they were all missing something important. During his morning coffee breaks, he found himself wandering to the botanical lab where she worked, not to bother her, but to watch how she had adapted to her limitations. Navira had become incredibly resourceful over the years. She had modified her workstation so everything was within arm's reach. Her hover chair could extend upward to reach higher shelves, and she had developed techniques to manipulate plant samples using extended tools and robotic arms. But Hyun-woo noticed the small moments of frustration that others missed, the way her jaw tightened when she couldn't reach a particular specimen, or how she would pause and stare at the plants growing on the upper levels of her vertical garden. 1. Afternoon. He struck up a conversation with her about her work. Navira's face lit up as she explained how she was trying to develop crops that could survive in the harsh conditions of asteroid mining colonies. Her passion was infectious, but when the topic shifted to her fieldwork days, her enthusiasm dimmed. "I used to climb the crystal formations on Thylos Prime," she said, her voice growing quiet. "Some of the most interesting plant specimens grow in the most difficult places. Now I can only study what others bring to me." The other doctors and researchers at the station spoke about Navira's condition in hushed, sympathetic tones. They had tried various treatments over the years, experimental, drugs, advanced physical therapy, even some cutting-edge Thylorian biotechnology. But they all approached the problem the same way the Thylorian doctors had, trying to heal what was broken. Hyunwoo came from a different world entirely. He had grown up in Seoul, where his father ran a small repair shop that fixed everything from ancient motorcycles to broken kitchen appliances. His childhood was filled with the sounds of grinding metal and the smell of welding sparks. His father's philosophy was simple: if you can't fix it, find another way to make it work. This wasn't how most species in the galaxy approach problems. The Thylorians were artists of biological perfection. They believed in restoring things to their original state, making them whole and complete again. The Arcturians were similar. Their technology was elegant and seamless, designed to integrate perfectly with natural systems. Even most human medical approaches focused on healing and restoration. But Hyunwoo thought like an engineer from Earth's grittier neighborhoods. He had learned to work with whatever materials were available, to improvise solutions that might not be pretty, but got the job done. When a part couldn't be fixed, you didn't give up. You built something better. As weeks passed, Hyunwoo began to see Navira's paralysis not as a medical condition, but as an engineering challenge. Her neural pathways were damaged beyond repair. That was a fact. But who said they had to be repaired? What if there was another way to send signals from her brain to her legs? He started spending his off hours in the station's technical library, reading everything he could find about neural interfaces, robotics, and prosthetic technology. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that everyone was approaching this problem from the wrong angle. The Thylorians saw Navira as a patient who needed to be healed. Hyunwoo began to see her as a brilliant scientist who just needed better tools. Her mind was sharp, her determination was strong, and her upper body was perfectly healthy. The only thing standing between Navira and her dreams of returning to fieldwork was the 12-inch gap in her spinal cord. And gaps, Hyunwoo knew, were made to be bridged. The fabrication lab at Kepler Station was designed for precision work. Clean surfaces, advanced 3D printers, and molecular assemblers that could craft components with atomic-level accuracy. But at 2 in the morning, Hyunwoo had transformed one corner into something that looked more like his father's old repair shop back in Seoul. Sparks flew as he welded together a crude metal frame, the acrid smell of burning flux filling the air. The design spread across 3 workbenches looked like organized chaos, sketches covered in coffee stains, salvaged circuit boards from decommissioned equipment, and motors pulled from old maintenance robots. Any Thylorian engineer would have been horrified by the mess, but Hyunwoo felt right at home. The prototype taking shape was far from elegant. The leg frames were built from repurposed titanium struts, thick and angular, where Thylorian technology would have been sleek and organic. The neural interface was a patchwork of human military-grade implant technology combined with alien sensor arrays he'd requisitioned from the supply depot. It looked like something cobbled together from spare parts because, essentially, that's exactly what it was. Each night, Hyunwoo would slip into the lab after his regular shift ended. He worked methodically, testing each component individually, before integrating it into the larger system. The neural sensors had to be recalibrated to work with Thylorian physiology. The servo motors needed custom programming to respond to the unique electrical patterns of her nervous system. Nothing fit together naturally. Everything required adaptation, modification, and a fair amount of creative problem-solving. 3. Weeks into the project, disaster struck in the form of discovery. Hyunwoo had been so focused on a particularly stubborn actuator assembly that he didn't hear the lab door open. When he finally looked up from his work, Navira was there, her hover chair positioned near his workbench, studying his prototype with unreadable, luminous eyes. "How long have you been there?" he asked, his heart racing. "Long enough to see what you're attempting," she replied quietly. Her gaze moved from the metal framework to the scattered neural interface components. "Another miracle cure?" The disappointment in her voice hit him harder than any anger would have. Hyun-woo set down his welding torch and turned to face her. Properly, he could see 12 years of broken promises written in the tired set of her shoulders. "It's not a cure," he said carefully. "It's more like a workaround." Navera's expression didn't change. "Do you know how many workarounds I've been offered over the years? Exoskeletons that broke down after a week, neural stimulators that caused more pain than they prevented, experimental treatments that left me sick for months." Hyun-woo nodded, understanding her skepticism, but something made him continue explaining anyway. "This isn't trying to fix your spine. It's trying to replace the signals that can't get through." Despite herself, Navera found her attention drawn to the crude prototype. There was something familiar about Hyun-woo's approach, the way he had spread components across multiple workstations, testing different combinations and configurations. It reminded her of her own work developing hybrid plant species, the endless trial-and-error process of finding combinations that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "The neural interface connects. Here," Hyun-woo explained, pointing to a cluster of sensors. "It reads the electrical activity from your motor cortex, the signals your brain is still sending, even though they can't reach your legs. Then it translates those signals into commands for the servo motors." Navera wheeled closer, examining the welded joints and exposed circuitry. It was rough work, but she could see the logic behind the design. More importantly, she could see that this human wasn't promising to make her whole again. He was simply offering to give her a different way to walk. "Why?" she asked finally. Hyun-woo paused in his explanation. "Because you shouldn't have to spend the rest of your life watching other people climb mountains while you study pictures of what grows at the top." For the first time in years, Navera felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The first time Navera tried to stand wearing the prototype legs, she lasted exactly 4 seconds before crashing to the padded floor of the lab. The metal framework had jerked violently to the left, the servos whining in protest as conflicting signals flooded the neural interface. Hyun-woo rushed to help her up, but Navera was already analyzing what had gone wrong. "The left sensor is picking up muscle tension from my shoulder," she said, brushing off the safety padding. "When I tried to balance, it interpreted that as a command to step sideways." Hyun-woo made notes on his tablet, sketching adjustments to the sensor placement. This was their routine now: test, fail, analyze, improve. Each session brought new challenges that no textbook had prepared them for. The neural feedback proved to be the biggest hurdle. Navera's brain was still sending signals to her legs, just as it had for the first 32 years of her life. But now those signals were being intercepted, translated and converted into mechanical commands. The process created a strange echo effect that left her feeling dizzy and disoriented. "It's like hearing your own voice played back with a delay," she explained after another failed attempt. "My brain expects to feel my feet touching the ground, but instead I'm getting electrical signals from pressure sensors." Hyun-woo spent an entire week recalibrating the feedback system, trying to make the artificial sensations feel as natural as possible. He studied how Navera's remaining nervous system worked, mapping the pathways that were still intact. Unlike Thylaurian technology that aimed for seamless biological integration, his approach was more like teaching 2 different languages to communicate. The breakthrough came during their 15th attempt. Instead of trying to perfectly mimic natural sensation, Hyun-woo programmed the system to provide simplified feedback, basic pressure readings and balance information that Navera's brain could learn to interpret over time. "Don't fight it," he suggested as she prepared for another test. "Let your brain figure out this new language." This time, when Navera stood up, she managed to stay upright for nearly 30 seconds. The legs still moved awkwardly, and she had to concentrate intensely on every small adjustment, but she was standing under her own power. When she finally lost her balance and sat back down, both of them were grinning. Each session revealed new problems to solve. The legs were too heavy, making Navera tire quickly. The joint motors created a grinding noise that echoed through the station corridors. The battery pack was bulky and uncomfortable, but with each problem they solved, the system became more refined. Navera brought her own insights to the project. Her background in biological systems helped her understand how to work with the technology rather than against it. She suggested modifications based on how plants adapted to challenging environments, gradual changes that built on small successes rather than dramatic overhauls. In botanical engineering, we don't try to force plants to grow in impossible conditions, she explained, while Hyunwoo adjusted the servo response times. We help them develop new strategies to thrive where they are. After 2 months of testing, Navera could walk across the lab with only minor wobbles. Her steps were deliberate and mechanical, nothing like the fluid grace she'd once possessed. But she was mobile again. More importantly, she was learning to trust the system. The real test came when she decided to walk to her botanical lab instead of using her hover chair. The journey was only 50 meters down the corridor, but it felt like a marathon. Station personnel stopped and stared as she made her way slowly but steadily past the observation windows. When she finally reached her destination, Navera was exhausted but triumphant. For the first time in 12 years, she had walked to work, under her own power. The legs might be crude and the movement artificial, but they were hers. The moment arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Hyunwoo was running final diagnostics on the neural interface when Navera wheeled into the lab, carrying 2 cups of the awful station coffee that had somehow become their tradition during these early morning sessions, ready for another round. "Of spectacular failures?" she asked with a wry smile, though Hyunwoo could hear the underlying hope in her voice that she tried so hard to hide. The robotic legs had been through countless modifications over the past 3 months. The original bulky framework had been streamlined, the grinding motors replaced with quieter servo units, and the neural interface fine-tuned through hundreds of hours of testing. What hadn't changed was the routine: suit up, stand up, inevitably, fall down, then figure out what went wrong. But this morning felt different somehow. Navera transferred from her hover chair to the testing bench, where the legs waited. The process had become second nature, connecting the neural interface cables, checking the power systems, running through the calibration sequence. Hyunwoo monitored the readouts on his tablet, watching the familiar patterns of brain activity translate into electrical commands. "Neural pathway recognition is stable," he reported. "Balance sensors are responding normally. Motor control is within acceptable parameters." Navera nodded and placed her hands on the support rails they had installed for these tests. The robotic legs hummed to life, servo motors engaging with their characteristic whir. She had learned to interpret these sounds, each one telling her something about the system's status. Then she stood up. At first, neither of them realized what was different about this attempt. Navera rose from the bench just as she had dozens of times before, the mechanical legs supporting her weight while she found her balance. But seconds passed, then a full minute, and she remained upright. "How long have I been standing?" Navera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hyunwoo checked his timer. 2 minutes and counting. The realization hit them both at the same time. This wasn't just another test, this was actually working. Navera was standing on her own, the robotic legs responding to her thoughts as naturally as if they were part of her body. "I want to try walking," she said. Hyunwoo moved to spot her, ready to catch her if she fell, but Navera took her first step with surprising confidence. The movement was deliberate and mechanical, nothing like the flowing grace she'd once possessed, but it was steady and controlled. Word spread quickly through Kepler Station. Dr. Park Soo-jin was the first to arrive, followed by a growing crowd of medical staff, researchers, and curious personnel who had heard the commotion. They gathered at the lab windows, watching in stunned silence as Navera took step after careful step across the room. In 12 years of practicing medicine, Dr. Park whispered to a colleague, "I've never seen anything like this." The Thylorian medical team was perhaps the most shocked of all. Dr. Veltar, who had consulted on Navera's case years earlier, stood frozen at the doorway. Everything he understood about neural damage said this should be impossible. The elegant biological solutions his people had developed couldn't bridge the gap in Navera's spine, yet here she was, walking with crude mechanical legs that looked like they'd been built in someone's garage. Navera completed her circuit of the lab and turned to face her audience. Her face was flushed with exertion, and she was breathing heavily from the effort, but her eyes shone with an emotion that had been absent for over a decade. Pure joy. "It's not perfect," she said to the gathered crowd. "The feedback is still strange, and I have to think about every step, but I'm walking." The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause that echoed through the corridor outside. But for Hyunwoo, the most meaningful response came from Navera herself. As she carefully sat back down to rest, she looked at him with tears in her luminous eyes. "Thank you for refusing to accept impossible," she said. "The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was remarkable to witness. Each day, Navera spent a little more time on her feet and a little less time in her hover chair." What fascinated Hyunwoo most was how the robotic legs seemed to be learning alongside her. The adaptive programming he had built into the system was based on machine learning algorithms from human military prosthetics research, but he had modified it specifically for Navera's unique neural patterns. Every step she took, every shift in weight, every stumble and recovery was recorded and analyzed by the system's processors. The legs were literally teaching themselves how to walk like Navera. During the first week after her breakthrough, Navera's steps were still robotic and deliberate. She had to pause between movements, concentrating on each action, like someone carefully translating between two languages, but by the second week something interesting began to happen. "The response time is getting faster," Hyunwoo noted as he reviewed the daily performance logs. "The system is starting to anticipate your intentions before you fully form the neural command." Navera had noticed it too. "Yesterday I thought about turning left, and the legs had already begun adjusting my balance before I consciously decided to move." The real breakthrough came when Navera decided to return to work in her botanical lab. For years, she had managed her research from her hover chair, using extended tools and robotic assistance to reach specimens on higher shelves. But now, for the first time since her accident, she could stand at her workbench like any other scientist. The first morning she walked into the lab wearing her robotic legs, her assistant Dr. Yoon Mi-soon nearly dropped a tray of plant samples. "Navera, you're standing." "Still getting used to it myself," Navera admitted, but there was undeniable pride in her voice. What happened next surprised everyone, including Navera herself. As she began examining a set of crystalline plant formations from the vegan colonies, she found herself naturally shifting her weight, turning to reach different instruments, even taking small steps to get better angles on her specimens. The movements were becoming unconscious, automatic. Hyunwoo watched the performance data with growing excitement. The legs' servo responses were becoming smoother, more organic. The balance algorithms were adapting to Navera's preferred posture and movement style. Most remarkably, the system was beginning to predict her intentions based on subtle cues, slight shifts in muscle tension, changes in her center of gravity, even patterns in her breathing. "It's like the legs are becoming part of you," he observed during one of their evening calibration sessions. Navera paused her examination of a rare flowering vine to consider this. "In botanical terms, we call it symbiosis. Two different organisms learning to work together so effectively that they function as one." The improvements weren't just mechanical. Navera's confidence was growing daily. She began taking longer walks through the station corridors, exploring areas she hadn't visited in years. The observation deck became a favorite destination, a place where she could stand at the viewing windows and watch the stars without feeling confined to her chair's limited perspective. Dr. Park Soo-jin documented these changes in her medical reports, noting improvements in Navera's muscle tone, posture, and overall physical condition. But the psychological changes were even more significant. The defeated resignation that had shadowed Navera for years was disappearing, replaced by something that looked very much like her old scientific curiosity. The day Navera climbed her first ladder changed everything. It was just a short maintenance ladder leading to the upper levels of her vertical garden, but as she carefully ascended each rung, testing the leg's ability to maintain balance while supporting her weight. Both, she and Hyunwoo realized they had achieved something neither had dared to hope for. She wasn't just walking anymore, she was truly mobile again. Standing among the upper-level plants that she hadn't been able to reach in over a decade, Navera carefully collected samples of a rare moss species. Her movements were fluid and natural, the robotic legs responding to her intentions as smoothly as if they had always been part of her body. "I had forgotten what it felt like to choose where to go," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. The first outside visitor to witness Navera's transformation was Lee Min-ho, a diplomatic attaché from the Korean embassy who had come to Kepler Station on routine business. He was reviewing trade agreements in the station's administrative wing when he heard an unusual sound echoing through the corridors, the steady rhythm of footsteps mixed with a soft mechanical humming. Curious, Min-ho followed the sound to one of the observation towers, where he discovered something that made him stop dead in his tracks. A Thylorian woman was climbing the spiral staircase that led to the upper levels of an elaborate aerial garden. But what caught his attention wasn't just that she was walking. It was the deliberate mechanical precision of her movements, combined with an unmistakably artificial whirring sound. "Excuse me," he called out in galactic standard. "Are you all right?" Navera paused on the stairs and looked down at him with amusement. "Perfectly fine, thank you. Just tending to my high-altitude specimens." It wasn't until later, during a formal dinner with station personnel, that Min-ho learned the full story. Dr. Park Soo-jin explained Navera's condition and the remarkable breakthrough that had occurred just months earlier. The diplomat listened with growing amazement as she described the crude prototype that had evolved into sophisticated adaptive technology. "You mean to tell me," Min-ho said slowly, "that a human engineer solved a problem that Thylorian medical science had declared impossible?" "Not solved," Dr. Park corrected. "Circumvented, that's what makes it so remarkable." Min-ho's report back to Earth created ripples that spread far beyond diplomatic circles. Within weeks, the story had reached scientific journals, medical conferences, and eventually the interstellar news networks. The headline that appeared across human space was simple but powerful: "Human engineer helps paralyzed alien scientist walk again." But it was the Thylorian reaction that truly surprised everyone. Instead of viewing the breakthrough as an embarrassment to their medical establishment, many Thylorian scientists saw it as a fascinating new approach to solving seemingly impossible problems. Dr. Veltar, the same physician who had initially declared Navera's condition untreatable, requested a full technical briefing on Hyunwoo's methods. "We have been approaching neural reconstruction like master gardeners," he admitted during a video conference with the station's medical team, "trying to regrow what was damaged. This human has shown us that sometimes the answer is not to repair the garden, but to build new pathways through it." Word spread quickly through Thylorian space and then beyond. The requests began as a trickle, a message here, a consultation request there. But within 3 months, Hyunwoo's inbox was flooded with pleas for help from across the galaxy. There was Kek Salah, a Mantian archaeologist who had lost 3 of his forearms in an excavation accident and been told he would never work in the field again. The Mantian medical system focused on perfect biological symmetry. They couldn't conceive of replacing lost limbs with anything other than exact biological duplicates, which their technology couldn't provide. A crystalline engineer named Shad Valin had been damaged in an industrial accident that left fractures throughout her silicon-based nervous system. Her people's approach to healing involved growing new crystal matrices, but the damage was too extensive and irregular for their precise geometric methods. Most heartbreaking was the message from a young Aquarian named Reefson, whose swimming appendages had been damaged by toxic algae. His water-dwelling species had no concept of artificial limbs. Their entire culture was built around fluid, organic movement through their ocean worlds. Each case presented unique challenges that traditional medicine had declared unsolvable. But they all shared one common thread. They had been told their conditions were permanent because the available treatments couldn't restore them to their original state. Hyunwoo found himself overwhelmed by the response. Station Commander Chen had to assign additional staff just to handle the communications traffic. Medical supply requests multiplied as word spread that Kepler Station was developing revolutionary prosthetic technologies. "I think we've accidentally started a movement," Hyunwoo confided to Navera as they reviewed the latest batch of consultation requests. Navera, who had become something of a celebrity in scientific circles, smiled as she examined a flowering vine that grew near the ceiling of her lab, a specimen she could only reach because of her newfound mobility. "Sometimes the most important revolutions begin with one person refusing to accept the word impossible," she replied. "The question now is, are you ready to help prove that impossible might just be another word for not yet figured out?" What started as Hyunwoo's after-hours tinkering project had grown into something nobody could have predicted. The small corner of the fabrication lab, where he had first welded together Navera's prototype legs, was now the center of a bustling research facility that occupied an entire wing of Kepler Station. The transformation began when the first group of patients arrived. 5 individuals from different species, each with conditions that their homeworld's medical systems had declared hopeless. Station Commander Chen had been skeptical about converting precious research space into what he called Hyunwoo's workshop, but the results spoke for themselves. Kexalar, the Mantian archaeologist, had been the first success after Navera. His species had 4 arms arranged in perfect symmetry around their torso, and losing 3 in an excavation accident had left him unable to perform even basic tasks. Mantan medicine focused on biological balance and couldn't conceive of asymmetrical solutions. Hyunwoo's approach was typically human. If you can't restore perfect balance, create new balance. Instead of trying to replace 3 lost arms with identical biological duplicates, he designed a single, sophisticated prosthetic unit that could perform the functions of multiple limbs. The device attached to Kexalar's remaining arm and extended into 3 separate manipulators, each controlled by different muscle groups. "It's like learning to play a musical instrument," Kexalar explained to the growing crowd of observers during his first successful test. "My brain had to discover new ways to think about movement." The success with Kexalar attracted attention from Dr. Choi Jin-ae, a biomechanics specialist who had been researching adaptive prosthetics at the Seoul National University Medical Center. When she saw footage of the Mantian archaeologist delicately brushing dirt from ancient artifacts using his new prosthetic system, she immediately requested a transfer to Kepler Station. "What you're doing here changes everything we thought we knew about neural adaptation," she told Hyunwoo during her first week on the station. "Traditional prosthetics try to replicate lost function. You're creating entirely new functions." Jin-ae brought with her advanced knowledge of human neural plasticity and biomechanical engineering. More importantly, she brought a systematic approach to research that helped transform Hyunwoo's intuitive methods into reproducible science. The breakthrough that convinced station leadership to fully fund the expanding program came with a patient named Vexithara, a Cephalorian trader who had lost 3 of his 7 manipulator arms in a cargo accident. Cephalorians were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible dexterity. Their 7-armed physiology allowed them to perform complex tasks that would require teams of workers from other species. Vexithara's injury had ended his career and left him unable to perform basic daily activities. His people's medical technology could regrow limbs, but the process took years and often resulted in arms with limited functionality. He had traveled to Kepler Station as a last resort. Working together, Hyunwoo and Jin-ae developed something revolutionary, a neural interface that could control multiple prosthetic limbs simultaneously, each operating independently but coordinated through a central processing unit. The system learned from Vexithara's remaining natural arms, studying their movement patterns and extending those patterns to the artificial limbs. The day Vexithara successfully juggled 7 objects simultaneously, 4 with his natural arms and 3 with his prosthetics, word spread throughout the station like wildfire. Dr. Park Soo-jin documented the event in her medical logs, noting that the patient had not only regained his lost capabilities, but had actually improved beyond his pre-injury performance. "The artificial arms don't get tired," Vexithara explained with obvious delight. And they can be programmed with precision settings that my natural arms can't match. As news of these successes spread, the requests for help multiplied exponentially. The fabrication lab expanded again, then again. Additional specialists arrived from Earth and other human colonies: engineers, programmers, materials scientists, and medical researchers who were drawn by the opportunity to work on problems that had never been solved before. What emerged was something unprecedented in galactic medicine: a research center dedicated not to perfecting existing treatments, but to inventing entirely new approaches to seemingly impossible problems. The team grew to include not just humans, but alien specialists who brought their own unique perspectives to the challenges. Janae established formal research protocols, turning each case into a learning opportunity that could benefit future patients. She documented the methods, published papers, and began training other researchers in what was becoming known as adaptive circumvention technology. But perhaps the most significant change was in the patients themselves. They began staying at the station longer, not just to receive treatment, but to help with research and to support newcomers facing similar challenges. Now Vera had become an unofficial ambassador, greeting new arrivals and sharing her own journey from hopelessness to mobility. "We're not just fixing individual problems anymore," Hyunwoo reflected as he watched the bustling activity in what had become the Adaptive Technologies Research Center. "We're building a community of people who refuse to accept limitations." The morning sun of Thylas Prime cast long shadows across the crystal formations where Navera now conducted her field research. 2 years had passed since she first stood on robotic legs in a cramped fabrication lab, and the transformation was complete in ways that went far beyond her restored mobility. She moved through the towering mineral gardens with fluid grace, her prosthetic legs adapting automatically to the uneven crystalline terrain. The latest generation of the technology bore little resemblance to Hyunwoo's crude first prototype. The legs were sleek, responsive, and so well integrated with her nervous system that she rarely thought about them anymore. They had become simply part of who she was. "Dr. Navera, the specimens from the high formations are ready for analysis," called out her research assistant, a young Thylorian named Kyle Wen, who watched his mentor's movements with undisguised admiration. Navera smiled and began climbing the steep path that led to the upper reaches of the crystal garden. These formations, some reaching nearly 50 meters into the sky, harbored plant species that had adapted to the unique mineral environment. Before her accident, she had been one of the few researchers brave enough to scale these heights. Now she was the only one who could do so safely, her robotic legs providing stability and grip that even healthy Thylorians couldn't match. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her artificial limbs had made her better at her job than she had ever been. Before word of Navera's return to active fieldwork had spread throughout Thylorian scientific circles, but the real impact went much deeper. The Hyunwoo Protocol, as it had come to be known, was revolutionizing medical practice across 12 star systems. The fundamental principle was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to restore damaged biological systems to their original state, find new ways to achieve the same goals. On Arcturus Prime, crystalline engineers were using adaptive prosthetics to replace damaged neural matrices with flexible hybrid systems that could evolve and improve over time. The rigid geometric perfection that had limited their medical technology was giving way to dynamic, learning-based solutions. The Mantian Archaeological Corps had established an entire division of enhanced researchers, scientists whose prosthetic limbs gave them capabilities that exceeded natural limitations. Ancient sites that had been impossible to excavate were yielding their secrets to archaeologists who could work in conditions that would defeat unaugmented explorers. Even more remarkably, some healthy individuals from various species were beginning to request elective prosthetic enhancements. The technology had evolved beyond medical necessity into a tool for expanding the boundaries of what different species could accomplish. Dr. Choi Jin-ae, now director of the Adaptive Technologies Research Center, had documented over 300 successful cases in her latest report. Each one represented not just a medical breakthrough, but a life transformed from limitation to possibility. The most interesting development, she noted in her quarterly summary, is how the technology has changed our fundamental understanding of disability itself. We're no longer asking, how do we fix what's broken? Instead, we're asking, how do we enhance what remains? Back on Kepler Station, Hyun-woo continued his work with a team that had grown to include specialists from dozens of species. The small corner lab where he had first experimented with salvage parts had become a galactic center of excellence, attracting the most challenging cases from across known space. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The human concept of making do, of finding practical solutions with available resources rather than waiting for perfect ones, had begun to influence medical practice throughout the galaxy. Species that had spent centuries perfecting elegant but inflexible solutions were learning to embrace adaptive, evolutionary approaches to seemingly impossible problems. Navera paused in her climb to examine a rare flowering vine that grew only in the highest reaches of the crystal formations. As she carefully collected samples, her movements were natural and unconscious. The robotic legs responded to her intentions as smoothly as if they had grown from her own genetic code. She often thought about that first conversation with Hyun-woo when he had told her that broken didn't mean forever broken. The human engineer had been right, but in ways neither of them had fully understood at the time. The real breakthrough hadn't been technological. It had been the simple refusal to accept limitations as permanent. As she worked among the crystal gardens, Navera reflected on the human trait that had changed not just her life, but the medical practices of entire civilizations, the stubborn, ingenious ability to build bridges where others saw only unbridgeable gaps. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not their technology, but their unshakable belief that every problem has a solution, even if that solution hasn't been invented yet. The impossible, it turned out, was just another word for not yet figured out.